"I'm too old for you," Elena said, smiling as she caught me staring. What she did next shocked me. She stepped closer. "Hello, I'm Marcus. I'm 24, and I've always been the guy who keeps things simple, respectful, safe. When my best friend Jake asked me to house sit his family's Victorian for the weekend, I expected quiet. Maybe some Netflix. Definitely not his aunt, Elena, showing up from Madrid with paint-stained fingers and eyes that seemed to see right through me. She wasn't supposed to be there. Missed her flight to the family wedding, she said, but when she looked at me over that coffee mug and said those words about age, her smile told a different story. I'm not the type to complicate things. I respect boundaries. But Elena's laugh had this warmth that made the whole kitchen feel smaller. And when she asked if I wanted to sit in the garden while she sketched, something in her voice made me forget every reason I should say no. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. I hadn't planned on company this weekend. Jake's parents' Victorian was going to be my sanctuary, just me, my laptop, and the gentle creak of old wooden floors. I'd house sat for the Morrisons before, knew the rhythm of their home like a familiar song. The way the afternoon light painted warm squares on the hardwood through the bay windows, the subtle scent of Margaret's herb garden drifting in from the kitchen windowsill. Friday evening settled around me like a comfortable sweater as I made my rounds. Water for the fiddle leaf. Fig in the reading nook. Check the mail. Set up my workspace at the antique desk where Jake and I used to cram for finals. Everything exactly where it should be. I just settled into my Saturday morning routine, coffee brewing, toast waiting, when the distinctive crunch of tires on gravel pulled me from my thoughts. A silver rental car I didn't recognize rolled into the driveway, and my stomach did an odd little flip when a woman emerged. Even if Jake hadn't shown me photos of his mom's best friend Elena, I would have known it was her. There was an artistic grace to her movements as she collected her luggage, something that matched the stories of the bohemian painter who'd found her way into their close-knit circle years ago. The doorbell chimed, and I opened it to find her looking apologetic. "You must be Marcus," she said, her voice carrying traces of warmth despite her obvious exhaustion. "I'm so sorry to crash your quiet weekend. My flight from Madrid was cancelled, and by the time they could rebook me, I'd miss the whole wedding. Anyway, please come in," I managed, helping her with her bags. "Jake mentioned you might be traveling through." I didn't add that he described her as brilliant but intimidating, a force of nature in academia before she'd left it all to pursue art. In person, she was different, softer somehow. Her dark hair was swept up in a messy bun, strands escaping to frame her face. Paint stains marked her fingers like tiny stories, and her clothes, simple linen pants and a worn sweater, spoke of comfort over presentation. She moved through the kitchen with the ease of someone who'd spent countless hours there, reaching unerringly for the coffee mugs. "Mind if I make a fresh pot?" The Madrid airport coffee was tragic, and I've been awake far too long. "Of course," I said, watching as she worked. There was something captivating about her presence, the way she made such a mundane task look like a small meditation. When she caught me studying her, a slight smile tugged at her lips. "I suppose Jake told you all about his mom's eccentric friend who threw away her tenure track to paint in Spain." She measured coffee with practiced precision. "He might have mentioned it once or twice. And now you're wondering if I'm having a midlife crisis?" Her eyes met mine, holding them with unexpected directness. "Actually," I said carefully, "I was thinking how much sense it makes. The way you move, you seem more artist than academic." Something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe appreciation. She turned back to the coffee maker, but not before I caught the slight flush in her cheeks. "You're very observant for someone so young." "I'm 25, I said, trying not to sound offensive. She glanced over her shoulder, and this time her smile held a hint of something else. Something that made my pulse quicken slightly. "And I'm 41, which makes me far too old for you to be looking at me like that." But she didn't look away. For one long moment, we just held each other's gaze across the kitchen counter. and I had the distinct feeling that age wasn't really what concerned her at all. There were other boundaries she was wrestling with, invisible lines drawn by friendship and loyalty and years of history in this very house. The coffee maker beeped, breaking whatever spell had settled over us. Elena turned to pour 2 cups, and I noticed her hands weren't quite steady. Steam curled from our mugs as we settled into the kitchen's morning quiet. Elena wrapped both hands around her coffee, shoulders relaxing as she breathed in the aroma. The simple gesture made her seem younger somehow, more present than the accomplished artist Jake had described. "So what brings you back to town?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "Besides the wedding you're missing." She took a slow sip before answering. "Research, actually. I'm working on a series about American Victorian architecture, the way these old houses hold stories in their bones." Her fingers traced the edge of her mug. "This place, especially. I've known it since Margaret and David first started restoring it. That must have been quite a project." "Oh, you should have seen it." Her eyes lit up, accent softening the edges of her words. "The wallpaper was tragic, layers upon layers of different decades. But underneath, ... She gestured to the exposed brick of the kitchen wall. Beautiful bones. Like discovering a secret that was waiting all along. I found myself leaning forward, caught by her enthusiasm. "One actually took some photos of the renovation process. Jake's dad asked me to document it. You're a photographer?" The question carried genuine interest rather than polite conversation. "Amateur," I admitted. "But I love capturing those in-between moments, when something's becoming something else." Elena set down her mug, studying me with new attention. "That's exactly it, isn't it? The transformation process. In painting, I'm always chasing that point where the familiar becomes strange, or the strange becomes familiar." Her hands moved as she spoke, sketching invisible shapes in the air. "Like when you left academia for art?" A slight smile played at her lips. "Perhaps. Though that was less transformation and more coming home to myself." She paused, considering. "What do you do, besides capturing in-between moments?" "Technical writing mostly. User manuals, instruction guides. Not quite as romantic as painting." "In Madrid, don't underestimate clear instructions," she said, her voice warming with amusement. "I once spent 3 hours trying to assemble a French easel with a manual that might as well have been written in hieroglyphics." I couldn't help laughing. "Please tell me you eventually figured it out." "Oh no, I gave up completely. Used it as a wine rack for 6 months before a friend took pity on me." Her laughter joined mine, rich and genuine. The conversation flowed easily after that. She told me about the light in Spanish cities, how it changed the way she saw color. I shared stories about photographing urban renewal projects, finding beauty in half-demolished buildings. With each exchange, I found myself paying closer attention to her expressions, the way her brow furrowed slightly when searching for the right word, how her hands became more animated when discussing art. When our mugs ran dry, Elena glanced at the garden visible through the kitchen window. Morning sun had burned away the early fog, leaving the air clear and inviting. "I should probably get some work done," she said, but there was a hesitation in her voice. "Would you like to join me outside? I need to do some preliminary sketches, and we could both use more coffee." The invitation hung in the air between us. On the surface, it was perfectly innocent, 2 creative people sharing a workspace on a beautiful morning. But something in her tone, in the way she waited for my response, suggested deeper waters. This wasn't just about sketching or coffee. I found myself pausing, weighing the subtle shift in atmosphere. "I'd like that," I said finally, and watched as she relaxed just slightly, as if she'd been holding her breath. "Good," she said softly, reaching for the coffee pot. "Bring your camera if you'd like. The garden light is lovely this time of day." We settled into the garden, Elena choosing a spot beneath the sprawling oak while I positioned myself on the weathered wooden bench nearby. The morning had warmed just enough to be comfortable, with sunlight filtering through the leaves in shifting patterns. I watched as she arranged her materials with practiced efficiency: sketchbook, pencils, a small set of watercolors that caught the light like jewels. The moment she began working, something changed in her demeanor. The polite, careful distance she'd maintained over coffee dissolved into complete absorption. Her hand moved across the paper with sure, quick strokes, barely seeming to lift between lines. I found myself captivated by the tiny furrow that appeared between her brows when she paused to study the play of light through the branches. "The oak's at least 100 years old," I said softly, not wanting to break her concentration. "Probably. Here before the house was built." She nodded without looking up. "That's exactly what interests me, how spaces hold time. See how the branches have grown around the power lines?" Her pencil traced the arc of a limb. "Nature adapting to our temporary additions. Nothing stays fixed. Is that what your series is about? Changes in architecture." Now she did look up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Not exactly. I'm interested in transitional spaces, places that exist between what they were and what they're becoming." She gestured toward the house. "Like this neighborhood. It's not what it was 50 years ago, and it won't be this way 50 years from now. We're just catching it at one moment in its evolution." Something in her voice made me wonder if she was talking about more than just buildings and trees. "That sounds kind of sad," I ventured. "Oh no," she smiled, setting down her pencil. "It's beautiful, actually. Nothing lasts forever, but that's what makes things precious. Like morning light through leaves, you can't capture it exactly. You can only interpret what it meant to you in that moment." I found myself sharing thoughts I'd never voiced before. "I've photographed this street hundreds of times, watching the seasons change. There's this one house down the block that's being renovated. Every time I pass, something's different. A new window, fresh paint, garden beds taking shape. It's like watching someone wake up slowly." Elena's eyes met mine with surprising intensity. "Yes, exactly. You understand." She turned her sketchbook toward me, and I moved closer to see. The oak tree was there, but she'd somehow captured more than just its form. The play of light through leaves seemed to dance on the paper, suggesting movement, life, the passage of time itself. "It's beautiful," I said honestly. "The way you've shown the light changing ... That's what fascinates me," she said, voice softening. "How something so familiar can become new if you look at it differently." She set aside her sketchbook and turned to study my face with the same focused attention she'd given the trees. "What do you see, Marcus, when you look at places you've known for years? Do they ever surprise you with something you've never noticed before?" The question hung between us, weighted with meaning I couldn't quite grasp, but could definitely feel. Her eyes held mine steadily, and I realized she wasn't just asking about architecture or photography. This was an invitation to look deeper at the neighborhood, at her, at myself, and all the assumptions I'd been carrying. "Sometimes," I answered carefully, "things you think you know completely can suddenly show you a whole new side. Like this garden. I've been here countless times, but this morning ... I gestured to where the sun had shifted, creating new patterns on the grass. "It feels different." She nodded slowly, her expression softening into something I couldn't quite read. "And do you welcome those differences when you find them? Or do they make you uncomfortable?" I knew we weren't talking about gardens anymore. Her question seemed to expand in the warm morning air, filling the space between us with unspoken possibilities. "Would you like to see the neighborhood through different eyes?" Elena asked, gathering her sketching supplies. Her question carried the warmth of genuine curiosity rather than mere politeness. I nodded, already reaching for my keys. "I'd like that." The afternoon light had softened to honey gold as we stepped onto the sidewalk. Elena moved at an unhurried pace, her attention caught by details I'd passed 1,000 times without noticing. She paused before a Victorian with elaborate trim work, pointing upward. "Look at those corbels, see how they echo the window frames. Someone took such care with those proportions." Her fingers traced the shapes in the air. "What memories do you have of this house?" I found myself sharing a story about sledding past it one winter morning, how the sunrise had turned those same corbels into glowing sculptures of ice. I must have been around 12. It was the first time I remember thinking about how light changes everything it touches. She smiled, a quick flash that reached her eyes. Already a photographer's instinct, even then. We moved through the neighborhood. Like this, Elena's questions drawing out memories I hadn't visited in years. The maple tree I'd climbed to rescue a neighbor's cat. The wraparound porch where Mrs. Henderson used to serve lemonade after baseball practice. Each story seemed to delight Elena, her responses making me see these familiar places as if for the first time. "Your neighborhood is full of stories," she said as we circled back toward Jake's house. "Thank you for sharing them with me." Back inside, Elena asked about my photography, her interest making me both nervous and eager to share. I retrieved my laptop, and we settled on the couch with enough space between us to feel proper, but close enough to share the screen comfortably. "These are mostly from the past year," I explained, opening my portfolio. "I've been focusing on urban landscapes, trying to capture how cities change at different hours." Elena leaned closer, studying each image with the same intensity she'd given her sketching. Her questions were precise, technical, but also deeply thoughtful. "The way you've caught the light here, reflecting off the wet pavement, what made you choose this angle?" "I waited almost an hour for the sun to hit just right," I admitted. "Something about the way the puddles were forming these little mirrors." "Yes, exactly," she nodded, her shoulder barely brushing mine as she pointed to another detail. "You have an eye for these intimate moments. The way this shadow falls across the doorway, it's like catching someone in mid-sentence." Her genuine engagement with my work made something expand in my chest. Here was someone who didn't just see the technical aspects, but understood the emotional intent behind each shot. The afternoon light slowly shifted around us as we moved through the portfolio, our discussion ranging from exposure settings to the philosophy of capturing fleeting moments. As evening approached, Elena glanced at her watch. "I should start dinner. I promised to cook in exchange for crashing your quiet weekend." "Let me help," I offered, following her to the kitchen. "I'm not much of a cook, but I can chop vegetables." The kitchen became a space of careful navigation. As we worked together, Elena moved with the same grace she'd shown while sketching, but now I was acutely aware of each time we passed each other. The brush of her sleeve against mine as she reached for herbs. The way she stepped aside to let me access the cutting board, her hand briefly touching my shoulder to steady herself. Steam rose from the pasta pot, filling the kitchen with warmth and the scent of garlic and herbs. Elena was explaining a technique for reducing sauce when we both reached for the wooden spoon resting on the counter. Our hands met over the smooth handle, and neither of us immediately pulled away. Time seemed to stretch like honey, marked only by the gentle bubbling of the pot and our suddenly shallow breathing. Her fingers were warm against mine, still faintly stained with charcoal from her sketching. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips where they met her skin. The moment held, delicate as a soap bubble, until Elena finally drew her hand back. With a soft exhale, "The sauce," she murmured, her voice slightly unsteady. "It needs stirring." I woke to the gentle clink of dishes drifting up from downstairs. Early morning light filtered through the guest room curtains, and for a moment, I lay there listening to Elena moving through the kitchen below. The familiar sounds felt different, somehow domestic in a way that made my chest tighten. When I made my way downstairs, still running a hand through my sleep-mussed hair, Elena was already settled at the kitchen table. She'd found Jake's French press and the good coffee beans, and a rich aroma filled the room. She looked up from her cup with a soft smile that made me forget my usual morning awkwardness. "I hope I didn't wake you," she said, pushing a second mug toward the empty chair across from her. "I'm still on Madrid time." "No, this is perfect timing." I settled into the chair, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic. The coffee was stronger than I usually made it, but I found I liked the bite. "How long were you in Spain?" 3 months this time." Elena traced the rim of her cup with one finger. I thought the distance might help clear my head after ... She paused, then continued more quietly. "After the divorce. But you can't really run from yourself, can you?" The confession hung in the morning air between us. I watched her hands, steady despite the vulnerability in her voice. "Sometimes I feel like I'm standing still while everyone else moves forward. I found myself saying. Jake's getting married. My other friends are buying houses, starting families. And I'm just here, taking pictures and house-sitting. Elena's expression softened with recognition. Caught between who you were and who you're becoming? Exactly. I met her eyes, surprised by how precisely she'd named it. It's like being in transition, but without knowing what you're transitioning to. Like those temporary spaces I've been sketching. She smiled, a hint of irony in her voice. Maybe that's why I'm drawn to them lately. Everything feels impermanent. The morning light shifted across the table as we talked, casting gentle shadows that elongated and retreated. Elena spoke about her marriage, not with bitterness, but with the kind of clarity that comes from distance. How she'd lost herself in being a professor's wife. How art had become something she squeezed into the margins of their life together. Madrid wasn't running away, she said, refilling our cups. It was running towards something. I needed to remember who I was when I was just Elena. I thought about my own photographs, how they often captured places and moments of change dawn breaking. Over city streets, storm light transforming familiar buildings. Sometimes you need distance to see things clearly. Elena nodded, understanding flowing between us like the steam from our coffee. And sometimes clarity finds you when you're not looking for it. We fell into a comfortable rhythm, clearing the breakfast dishes, moving around each other with the same awareness as the night before, but now tinged with something warmer. More certain, Elena dried her hands on a dish towel, then turned to face me. I've been thinking, she said, her tone casual but her eyes intent. You mentioned some of the places you photographed. Would you want to show me? We could drive out, spend the day exploring beyond the neighborhood. The suggestion felt significant, a step away from the safety of Jake's house into spaces that would be just ours. My heart picked up speed even as I tried to keep my voice steady. I'd like that. There's an old industrial district about an hour north that has amazing light in the afternoons. Perfect. Elena's smile held a hint of adventure. Let me grab my sketchbook. I watched her head upstairs, aware that we were crossing some invisible line. The day stretched ahead of us, full of possibility and that particular kind of anticipation that comes with choosing to step into unknown territory together. The late morning sun warmed the car as we drove north, following roads I knew by heart, but that felt different with Elena beside me. She'd settled into the passenger seat with her sketchbook balanced on her knees, occasionally making quick gestural drawings of the passing landscape. Turn here, I said, pointing to a narrow road that curved behind an old factory complex. This is one of my favorite spots. The way the light hits the brick around 2 in the afternoon makes the whole building glow. Elena leaned forward, studying the weathered architecture with an artist's eye. I see why you're drawn to it. Those upper windows, they're like eyes watching the city change around them. I hadn't thought of it that way before. That's exactly the kind of detail I try to capture. The human element in abandoned spaces. We spent the next hour exploring the industrial district, Elena pointing out compositions I'd missed despite countless visits. She had a way of finding beauty in unexpected places, a spiral of rust on an old door, the geometric shadows cast by loading dock stairs. Sometimes the most interesting stories, she said, sketching quickly, are in the details everyone else overlooks. The afternoon led us to River Bend Park, where a stone overlook provided a perfect view of the city skyline. We sat on a bench, sharing the thermos of coffee we'd brought and watching clouds drift across the autumn sky. I used to come here to think during the divorce, Elena said quietly, her accent softening the edges of the words. Not just about the paperwork or logistics, but about trust. How to rebuild it. I turned toward her, noting how she kept her eyes on the horizon, trust in others, in myself. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. When you build a life with someone, you create this story about who they are, who you are together. Richard, my ex-husband, he had an emotional affair with a graduate student. Nothing physical, he said, as if that made it better. She gave a small, sad laugh. But what haunted me wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing I'd missed all the signs. I started questioning my judgment about everything, especially relationships. The wind lifted a strand of her hair, and I resisted the urge to brush it back. That must have been isolating. It is. She turned to face me. But slowly, I'm learning to trust my instincts again. To believe what I feel, even when it's unexpected. Something in her tone made my heart beat faster. I found myself sharing my own fears, words spilling out with unexpected honesty. Sometimes I wonder if staying here is the easy choice. Everyone else seems so sure about their path, Jake with his wedding, my college friends moving to bigger cities. I take these photographs, and they're good, but am I just hiding in familiar places? Elena set down her coffee and shifted to face me fully. There's courage in uncertainty, you know. In staying present while you figure things out, instead of running toward the first clear answer. Her eyes held mine. Sometimes the right path doesn't look like anyone else's. How do you know which feelings to trust? I asked, the question carrying more weight than I'd intended. She reached for my camera, which sat between us on the bench. May I? I nodded, watching as she lifted it, her fingers brushing mine as she adjusted the focus ring. Photography is about seeing what's really there, isn't it? Not what you expect to see, but what's actually in front of you. Her hands lingered on mine, warm despite the cool afternoon air. Neither of us moved for a long moment, the contact saying everything. We weren't putting into words. The light's changing, she said softly, but she didn't pull away. It is, I agreed, understanding we weren't just talking about photography anymore. We sat there as the afternoon deepened around us, both aware of the current running between us, too strong now to ignore, too delicate yet to name. Elena's fingers remained on the camera, on my hands, as if this point of contact allowed us to acknowledge what was building without having to define it. The city stretched out below us, familiar and somehow new, like everything else in that moment. I found myself studying Elena's profile, the way the late sunlight caught the silver at her temples, how her expression held both certainty and question. She turned and caught me watching, but this time neither of us looked away. The drive back to Jake's house felt different, charged with everything we'd shared at the Overlook. Elena hummed softly to the radio, her sketchbook filled with new drawings, resting in her lap. The late afternoon sun slanted through the trees, making the familiar streets glow like they'd been dipped in honey dot when we pulled into the driveway. Elena turned to me with a spark of inspiration in her eyes. What do you say we make something special for dinner? After all this fresh air and exploring, I'm craving something more interesting than sandwiches. I'd like that, I said, following her up the porch steps. Though I should warn you, my culinary skills are pretty basic. She laughed, the sound warming the space between us. Don't worry, I'll teach you a few tricks. It's the least I can do after you showed me your photography spots. The kitchen welcomed us with its familiar comfort, but something had shifted since yesterday. The careful distance we'd maintained while cooking our first meal together had softened into something more natural. Elena moved through the space with easy grace, pulling ingredients from the refrigerator while I washed my hands. Here, she said, handing me an onion and a cutting board. You start with this while I prep the rest of the vegetables. We fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side at the counter. The late afternoon light streamed through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Elena shared stories about learning to cook from her grandmother in Madrid, her accent growing stronger as she recalled childhood memories. She always said cooking is like painting, Elena mused, efficiently dicing a red pepper. It's all about composition, color, timing, the way flavors build on each other, like layers on a canvas. I found myself watching her hands as she worked artist's hands, strong and sure, with traces of paint still visible around her nails. The sunlight caught in her hair, highlighting threads of silver that seemed to shimmer as she moved. Without meaning to, my eyes traced the curve of her neck, the concentrated set of her mouth, the way she bit her lower lip slightly when focusing on a precise cut. She looked up suddenly, catching me in my observation. But unlike yesterday morning, there was no deflection about age, no quick joke to break the tension. Instead, she held my gaze steadily, a question in her dark eyes that made my breath catch. The moment stretched between us, heavy with possibility. Couldn't read the exact meaning in her expression. Was it invitation? Uncertainty? A mix of both? The knife in my hand stilled completely as we looked at each other. The kitchen quiet except for the soft sound of our breathing and the distant ticking of Jake's antique wall clock. Elena broke the silence first, but her voice was gentle, almost wondering. The light in here is beautiful right now, isn't it? It is, I agreed, understanding we were talking about more than just the sunlight painting the kitchen in warm gold. She turned back to her cooking, but something in her posture had changed. A subtle relaxation, as if some invisible barrier had lowered just a fraction. We continued preparing dinner, our movements around each other more fluid now, less cautious. When she reached past me for the salt, her arm brushed mine, and neither of us pulled away too quickly. Our conversation drifted from serious topics to lighter ones, punctuated by comfortable stretches of silence that felt as natural as breathing. She taught me her grandmother's trick for perfectly sautéed garlic, her hand covering mine briefly to demonstrate the proper motion with the wooden spoon. I shared funny stories about Jake's early cooking disasters in this same kitchen, making her laugh in a way that crinkled the corners of her eyes. The kitchen filled with warm aromas and fading sunlight, and I found myself storing away small details, the way Elena tucked her hair behind her ear when tasting the sauce, how she swayed slightly to a rhythm only she could hear while stirring, the soft Spanish phrases she murmured to herself while cooking. Every time our eyes met, that same unspoken question lingered, growing clearer with each passing moment. Though neither of us seemed ready to voice it yet, after we finished eating, Elena walked to the kitchen window, tracing the golden light with her fingertips against the glass. "This is perfect photography light," she said, turning to me with that spark in her eyes again. "Have you ever shot the old railroad bridge at sunset? The one we passed on our walk?" I shook my head, already reaching for my camera bag. "I haven't, actually. It's always been more of a daytime spot for me." "We should go," she suggested, and something in her voice made me look up. The way she said it felt deliberate, like she was proposing more than just a photo opportunity. "The light will be perfect for about an hour." The bridge was a 15-minute walk from Jake's house, far enough to feel like we were leaving something behind. Elena walked close beside me, our shoulders occasionally brushing as we made our way through the quiet neighborhood streets. The evening air held that particular sweetness that comes just before sunset, when everything seems to glow from within. "I love this time of day," Elena said softly as we approached the old tracks. "In Spanish, we call it La Hora Magica, the magic hour. Everything becomes softer, more forgiving." She paused, running her hand along the weathered metal of the bridge. "It's when ordinary things reveal their hidden beauty." I lifted my camera, capturing the way the light caught in her hair as she looked out across the valley. She turned at the sound of the shutter, but instead of asking me not to photograph her, she smiled. "What settings are you using?" "Manual," I said, adjusting the aperture. "I like having control over the depth of field, especially in this kind of light." Elena moved closer, peering at the display screen. "Show me? I've always wanted to understand photography better. As an artist, I should know more than just point and shoot." Her perfume, something light and citrusy, mingled with the evening air. I began explaining the basic principles of exposure, but found myself increasingly aware of her presence beside me. When I mentioned adjusting the focus ring, she stepped behind me, her hands covering mine on the camera. "Like this?" she asked, her voice close to my ear as she helped guide the lens. The warmth of her body against my back made it hard to concentrate on technical details. "Yeah," I managed, my voice sounding rougher than I intended. "You want to turn it slowly until the edges sharpen." But neither of us was really looking through the viewfinder anymore. Her hands stayed on mine, our fingers intertwined around the camera body. The sunset painted everything in deep gold and rose, but I was only aware of the gentle pressure of her touch, the soft sound of her breathing. "Marcus," she said quietly, still standing close behind me. The way she said my name felt different. Careful, like she was testing how it felt in this new context. I turned slightly, just enough to see her face. The last rays of sunlight caught in her eyes, turning them amber. That question was there again, stronger now, impossible to ignore in this stolen moment away from the house and its familiar boundaries. We stood like that for a long moment, suspended between movement and stillness. The camera hung forgotten. In our joined hands, the perfect light fading unnoticed around us. A train whistle sounded in the distance, reminding us of the world beyond this bridge. Beyond this moment, Elena's thumb moved slightly against my hand, an almost imperceptible caress that sent electricity through my entire body. The space between us felt charged with possibility, each breath bringing us closer to something neither of us had named yet. "We should probably head back," she said eventually, though she didn't move away, "before we lose the light completely." But there was something in her voice that suggested she wasn't really talking about the sunset, and when she finally stepped back, the absence of her warmth felt significant. We gathered our things in comfortable silence, the moment on the bridge, hanging between us like a shared secret. The walk home felt different than the walk out, slower, more deliberate, as if we were both trying to preserve something fragile. The streetlights were just beginning to flicker on, creating pools of soft light along our path. Every now and then, our hands would brush as we walked, and neither of us would pull away too quickly. The golden light was almost gone now, painting everything in soft violet shadows. Elena still stood close, closer than necessary for looking at photos or discussing camera settings. The usual excuses for proximity had faded with the sunset, leaving us with nothing but honest intention. In the growing dark, I could feel the warmth of her even without touching, that magnetic awareness that makes your skin prickle. The camera hung heavy between us, forgotten but still held in our joined hands like an anchor to reality. Elena drew in a slow breath. "Marcus," she said softly, her accent making my name sound like something precious. I think we should talk about whatever this is, before it goes any further." My heart stumbled over itself at her words, not a rejection, but an acknowledgement. Carefully, I set my camera down on my bag and turned to face her fully. The last traces of sunset caught in her eyes, making them gleam amber in the dusk. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, voicing the doubt that had been whispering in the back of my mind. "I mean, I don't want to be just ... I don't know. A vacation distraction. Or something that feels right just because we're both lonely." She smiled then, a gentle expression that held more warmth than amusement. "Those are good questions," she said, reaching up to brush an imaginary piece of lint from my shoulder. Her hand lingered there. "The honest answer is that I don't know exactly what this is, but I've spent 2 years protecting myself from anything that might be complicated or uncertain." Her fingers moved slightly against my shoulder, and I found myself holding my breath. "And what I've learned," she continued, "is that sometimes protecting yourself from hurt means protecting yourself from everything good too." The evening had gone completely purple around us now, the first stars appearing overhead. A cool breeze swept across the bridge, carrying the scent of summer grass and distant rain. "What do you want?" I asked quietly, searching her face in the fading light. Right now, in this moment? Elena's answer wasn't in words. She stepped closer, that last half step that erased any pretense of casual distance, and brought her hand up to my face. Her touch was featherlight against my cheek, questioning and certain all at once. I stayed perfectly still as she leaned in, giving her time to change her mind, to step back, to reconsider. She didn't. The first brush of her lips against mine was gentle, tentative, like she was asking permission. Then I responded, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like falling and flying at the same time. Her lips were soft, tasting faintly of the tea we'd had after dinner, and something else I couldn't name but recognized instantly. Possibility, maybe, or truth. I brought my hands up to frame her face, and she made a small sound in the back of her throat that undid me completely. The kiss felt like finding something I hadn't known I was missing, like coming home to a place I'd never been but somehow remembered. We walked back through the quiet streets, our hands linked loosely between us. The neighborhood felt different. Now, transformed not by the deepening night, but by the gentle swing of our joined hands and the lingering warmth of that kiss. Every few steps, Elena's fingers would tighten slightly around mine, a small gesture that felt like punctuation in a conversation we weren't having out loud. The crickets had started their evening chorus, and somewhere distant, a train whistle echoed across the valley. I noticed things I might have missed before, the way Elena's thumb traced small circles against my palm, how our footsteps gradually fell into the same rhythm, the subtle vanilla scent of her perfume carried on the evening breeze. Neither of you seemed eager to break the silence. It wasn't the careful quiet of earlier, weighted with unspoken possibilities. This silence felt more like agreement, like we were both savoring this simple pleasure of touch and proximity without needing to define it. Yet, as we rounded the corner onto Oak Street, the Victorian's detailed silhouette emerged against the twilight sky. Elena's pace slowed slightly as we approached the house, and I matched her stride, understanding her reluctance to end this moment too quickly. The porch light cast warm patterns across the wooden steps as we climbed them. Elena paused at the top, turning to face me but keeping hold of my hand. In the golden glow, I could see the slight furrow between her brows, not doubt exactly, but careful consideration. "Marcus," she said softly, her free hand coming up to Pew. "Rest against my chest. I need to be honest with you about something." I nodded, waiting. "I can't." She paused, choosing her words. "I can't promise you anything beyond tomorrow. Not because I don't want to, but because I've learned the hard way about making promises when everything feels this new." Her fingers curled slightly against my shirt. "But I also know that if I go upstairs alone tonight, I'll lie there wondering what it would feel like to not be lonely, to just be here with you without questioning every moment." The honesty in her voice made my chest ache. I brought our joined hands up and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Elena, I'm not looking for guarantees, I think." I took a breath, wanting to get this right. "I think sometimes the bravest thing we can do is just let something be what it is right now, without trying to control what it becomes." She smiled then, soft and real. "When did you get so wise?" "Must be all those philosophy books Jake leaves lying around," I said, and was rewarded with her quiet laugh. The porch swing creaked gently in the evening breeze, and somewhere in the garden, a wind chime rang a single clear note. Elena stepped closer, her hand sliding up from my chest to rest against my neck. "So what is this right now?" she asked. I considered her question carefully. "This is two people choosing not to be alone tonight. This is seeing where this connection leads, without demanding it lead anywhere specific. This is just ... us being honest about wanting to be closer." Her thumb brushed against my jaw. "I like that answer," she whispered, and the way she looked at me then made me forget every careful thing I'd planned to say next. Inside, the house felt different, intimate in a way it hadn't been before. The entry hall's dim lighting caught the curves of Elena's face as she stopped at the foot of the stairs, her hand still in mine. She turned to face me, and something in her expression made my heart skip. "I need you to know something," she said softly, her accent wrapping around the words like silk. Her free hand came up to rest against my chest, right over my heartbeat. "For 2 years, I've been ... She paused, searching for the right words. "I've been building walls, protecting myself. After Richard, I thought that was the smart thing to do." I covered her hand with mine, feeling the slight tremor in her fingers. The grandfather clock in the corner marked time with gentle precision, but the moment felt suspended, waiting. "But this weekend," she continued, "being here with you, you make me want to try again, to be vulnerable again." Her eyes met mine, clear and honest. "And that terrifies me a little, but in a good way. Does that make sense?" I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. I started, then had to clear my throat. "I've never felt like this with anyone before. Like they really see me, not just who they expect me to be." Elena's smile was soft in the shadows. I do see you, Marcus. That's part of what scares me, how clearly I see you after such a short time. The first step creaked under our feet as we began climbing the stairs together. Elena's hand was warm in mine, her fingers interlaced with a gentle pressure that felt like trust. Each step felt meaningful, like we were ascending towards something. More than just the second floor. My heart was racing, but not from nerves exactly. It was more like anticipation mixed with certainty, that rare feeling when you know you're exactly where you're meant to be, even if you couldn't have planned. At the top of the stairs, Elena led me down the familiar hallway. The house's nighttime sounds, settling wood, distant traffic, the whisper of leaves against windows, created an intimate cocoon around us. When we reached her door, she paused, turning to face me again. In the soft light filtering through the hallway window, I could see the question in her eyes before she spoke it. Would you ... she started, then took a steadying breath. Would you like to come in? Not because I expect anything specific, but ... Her free hand came up to touch my face gently. I don't want to spend another night wondering what it would feel like to fall asleep next to someone who sees me, really sees me. The vulnerability in her voice made my chest ache. Looking into her eyes, I saw all the trust she was offering, all the walls she was choosing to lower. Yes, I said quietly, the word carrying all the certainty I felt in that moment. Her smile then was like sunrise, slow and beautiful and full of promise. Morning came like a watercolor painting, soft edges, gentle light filtering through unfamiliar curtains. I woke slowly, aware of Elena's warmth beside me, her breathing steady and peaceful. The early sunlight caught in her hair, turning the silver strands to gold, and I found myself memorizing the moment, wanting to capture every detail. We had talked for hours last night, sharing stories that felt too delicate for daylight. Her hand had traced patterns on my arm while she told me about her first art show in Madrid, and I described the exact moment I realized photography was more than just a hobby. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, we'd fallen asleep curled together, her head tucked against my shoulder like it belonged there. Elena stirred beside me, her eyes fluttering open. When she caught me watching her, a smile spread across her face, slow and genuine, without any of yesterday's careful boundaries. "Good morning," she whispered, her accent thicker with sleep. Her hand found mine above the covers, fingers intertwining. Naturally, "What time is it?" "Early still," I said, watching the way the light played across her features. "We have time." She hummed contentedly, stretching like a cat. "Coffee?" The word held a hopeful note that made me smile. "I'll make it," I offered, but she shook her head. "Together," she said. "I don't want to break this spell just yet." Downstairs, the kitchen felt different in the morning light, more intimate somehow, as if the house itself was holding its breath around our new reality. Elena wore my borrowed t-shirt like it had always been hers, padding barefoot across the tile while I measured coffee grounds. The familiar routine of making coffee took on new meaning with her there, reaching around me for mugs, her hand brushing my back as she passed. When the coffee was ready, she retrieved her sketchbook from where it lay forgotten since yesterday. "May I?" she asked, opening to a fresh page. I nodded, watching as she began to capture our 2 coffee cups, steam still, rising in delicate spirals. Her hands moved with sure strokes, adding shadows and highlights that transformed the ordinary scene into something precious. The kitchen filled with morning sounds, birds outside, coffee being sipped, pencil scratching against paper. Elena looked up from her drawing, catching my eye with an expression that made my heart skip. "Marcus," she said softly, setting down her pencil. "When I return to the city next month... She paused, and I could see her gathering courage. "Would you like to see me again?" The question hung in the air between us, full of possibility. I thought about how naturally we'd fallen into orbit around each other, how easily conversation flowed, how right it felt to wake up beside her. This weekend had started as something temporary, a chance encounter in a borrowed house, but sitting here in the morning light, watching her draw our coffee cups with such care, it felt like the beginning of something much more permanent. Yes, I said, reaching across the table to touch her hand. I'd like that very much. Her smile then was like watching a flower bloom, slow and beautiful and full of promise. Thanks for sharing this quiet with me. Hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and tell me which moment stayed with you. A new story arrives every day at the same hour.